Hey everybody, welcome to dotnetConf. Super happy to kick this thing off and tell everybody a whole bunch about cool .NET stuff that's coming in the future. So I'm Scott Hunter, if you don't know me, and I'm the programming manager that runs the .NET team at Microsoft. I used to be part of the ASP.NET team. We folded that team into the main .NET team. But let's get started. To me, .NET is in its best place it's ever been. Back at the Build conference earlier this year, we announced that we had acquired Xamarin, which brought the ability to build iOS, Android, and Mac OS X apps to the .NET platform. So that means now you can build any type of app you'd ever want to. If you want to build a great server application that's cross-platform that runs on Linux, we've got .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. If you want to build cross-platform devices, we've got Xamarin. If you want to build awesome applications for Windows, be it Windows devices, desktops, we have a variety of technologies. We have UWP for building touch applications. We've got WinForms and WPF, which are great platforms for building desktop applications. So we've got pretty much everything covered. And so I can't imagine a better time to be a .NET developer. This is some of the content that I talked about at Build, but I want to drill into these points a little bit more. This is kind of the .NET world that we live in today. We've got lots of .NET stacks. We have the .NET framework. This traditionally ships on Windows, and you build desktop applications, UWP applications with this. We have .NET Core, which we've been working on for about 2 years now, and this is our cross-platform stack for building ASP.NET applications, for building console applications that run on all the platforms. And of course, we have Xamarin, which I said before, iOS, Android, and Mac OS X. Part of the challenge for you, the developer, is each of these things provides another mechanism or another library you have to learn to build these things. You know, you have the base class library for .NET Framework. .NET Core has a smaller base class library. And then Xamarin's got Mono, which is a slightly different library. So we get these 3 libraries, and it makes it a little difficult to share code across all the platforms. And it also has other challenges as well, which is if you want to build something, you have to go target one of these things. So moving forward, we want to move to this new world where you have one .NET Standard library. So no matter if you're building an iOS application, you're building an ASP.NET Core server application, or you're building a desktop application, there is a single .NET library that you can look to across all those platforms. And we call this the .NET Standard library. An early version of this is going to ship as part of .NET Core later this month, and you're going to see us continue to add here as we move forward. In fact, I like to say this is the future area that I want to actually innovate in the framework. If we're going to add new API surfaces, we'll add them to the .NET Standard library, which means you don't have to worry about targeting .NET 4.6.2 or targeting .NET Core 1.0 or targeting some version of Mono. You just target the .NET Standard library and your code runs across all the platforms. So as I mentioned, master one library, not a bunch of these things. If you look at our code sharing that we have today, it's something called portable class libraries. Great technology. But it's a smaller subset of shared code between all those platforms. We want to make that much bigger. And then, as I said, we can add stuff to the .NET Standard without having to ship another version of Windows for .NET Framework, for example, or shipping another version of Mono. We can just add stuff because these things are just NuGet packages that add into the platform. So I think it will let us innovate a lot more quickly, and it's going to be good in the future. Let me show something here. Next thing I want to talk about is tools. We have tools, Visual Studio Code, and now we have Xamarin Studio. So we have a great array of tools to build .NET applications across all the platforms. What's great is Visual Studio is the same Visual Studio you're used to, but we have the new ones here, Visual Studio Code, cross-platform editor for building applications on any platform you want, Mac, Linux, or Windows. And we have Xamarin Studio, which is new as well. And it was exciting. Yesterday I saw there was an extension that was just released for Xamarin Studio yesterday to let you build ASP.NET Core applications in Xamarin Studio. So you can actually use that full IDE to build ASP.NET applications. So as I talk about the .NET Standard, I want to talk a little bit about what's going to ship in our RTM this month, and then what's going to come beyond that. So a lot of folks who follow us on Twitter or follow us on our blog or follow us on some of the Slack channels out there might have heard that we plan to bring more APIs back. And I want to be clear about what that means for you. First off is We're going to bring back things like app domains, full reflection, binary serialization, and more as we move forward. The goal here is not necessarily to make it easier to port your applications to .NET Core. The real goal here is I want to make it where there's one .NET that you can share code between all of our platforms, the full framework, Core CLR, and Xamarin. So that's really the goal here as we bring APIs back. And also when you read about us bringing APIs back, I want to be very clear to the people out there. This doesn't mean that your application is going to have to change again. One of the things that we've learned is through the .NET Core path is we've had the project change quite a few times over the past 2 years. And I want to be very clear to everybody, as we move forward, these new things that we'll do are just going to be additive things. You're not going to have to port your project from RC2 to RTM or RTM to version 1.1. It's going to be very consistent moving forward. And so when you see us start talking about bringing things back, or I'll talk about Project JSON later today as well, these things are not going to require you to start over again like we've done through Beta 8, RC1, RC2. So I want to be very clear about that. Another part, as we start talking about that investment in that bottom section, which is the .NET Standard, which we're going to bring the libraries back. It's also got our jitter, garbage collection, languages. I want to talk about languages. We have a bunch of cool features that we're going to bring back in C#7. Pattern matching, tuples, a bunch of really cool stuff. Tuples, for people that don't know, that's where you can actually return a result with multiple values. We also plan to invest in VB as well. We want to make it very easy that as we add features to C#, as a Visual Basic developer, you should still be able to call any of the code using those new features. So you'll see features like tuples and stuff that will flow into Visual Basic. And then of course, F#, we have a lot of customers that really love F#. It's great for doing modeling of financial data and stuff like that. We announced at Build that we're bringing F# to .NET Core. And then I hope over the future that we'll actually end up bringing F# into other technologies like ASP.NET Core as well. So the cool thing is, no matter what .NET you're on, you get to see any of these language innovations in C#, VB, or F# will apply across all the .NETs. Next thing I want to talk about is the tools. And we've got the tools here, Visual Studio Code, and Xamarin Studio. And as I mentioned before, these tools are awesome. They will be able to continue to invest in each of the technologies. So we'll continue to add new support for WinForms and WPF as part of this. You continue to see us add new extensions to Visual Studio Code to give you more capabilities. We just, at the Build conference, and recently as well, as part of RC2, enabled you to actually run the debugger on Visual Studio Code, and so you can debug across all the platforms. Moving forward, you'll see us do things like Docker support as well. And then of course, Xamarin Studio, as I said, iOS, Android, Mac OS X apps on the Mac platform. And as I said, there's an extension now that lets you actually even build ASP.NET Core apps there. So as I said, tools for any developer, no matter what you're building, these tools are awesome for that. Project unification. So one of the cool things that happened as part of the ASP.NET 5, which became ASP.NET Core effort 2 years ago, was we started trying to rethink a lot of .NET. We knew we wanted to run cross-platform, and so we started thinking, as a cross-platform developer, what would you have to do? And that meant that we started focusing on CLI first. So everything you do in .NET Core, you actually do with the CLI first, and then we wrap that in the awesome tools. We also experimented with some other ideas, which was having a new project system. As a web person trying to build a awesome web, and you look at other web technologies like PHP or Node.js, you start seeing some different patterns that happen in those platforms. And some of those patterns are things like, hey, I can just add files to my project and compile and run. And that was something that we introduced as part of the Project JSON project model. We also offered the ability to hand edit a Project JSON file. It was very simple JSON that you could hand edit and add things like references to in a very simple way. And so a lot of customers really enjoyed that. But we ran into a challenge as we worked on that tech. And that tech was awesome for the web projects, but as people started trying to use Project JSON in some of our other tech, like WinForms or WPF, we had people asking, trying to use Project JSON in Xamarin. How does that work? Even inside of Visual Studio itself, it's actually a challenge. Because it's a new project system, that means all the features in Visual Studio have to be modified to support that new project system. Things like profiling, debugging, all these things need to actually be modified to work with Project JSON. And so as we started talking about some of that unification I was mentioning earlier, where we want to make it very easy to move code with the .NET Standard across all these platforms, we also want to make it very easy to have a build system that crosses all those platforms. So as a team, we looked at, hey, do we take Project JSON and move it to Mono? Do we move it to all of the CS Proj projects like WinForms, WPF, et cetera? And that looked like a lot of work. The other thing is, a lot of people love the simplicity of Project JSON, but as I go and add all the support to Project JSON to support multi-targeting devices and all this kind of stuff, the assumption is Project JSON is going to get a lot more complicated as part of that. And so it might not be the same beautiful thing that we have today. And so because of that, we decided, hey, we're going to standardize all the frameworks around the .NET Standard. Why don't we standardize all of the tooling around CS Proj and MS Build? Now, if you use Project JSON, you might be screaming, no, 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 I really love the model. I want to be very clear. Part of the goal of bringing that stuff all together back to MS Build, we don't plan to lose any of the cool things that happened from the Project JSON project. So for example, as we move back to CS Proj, we will go and add all those cool features to CS Proj. So you will be able to actually have a project, drop files in it, and not have to go hand edit your CS Proj or use a tooling gesture in Visual Studio to add those things back. We will support just having files in a folder, and you can run those things. That's one of many things that we'd like to bring back. Another example is one of the cool things Project JSON allowed you to do was actually compile a project, and the output of that compiled project could be a package. Nothing prevents us from building that into CS Proj as well. And so there's a whole team of us working together to actually take all of those features of Project JSON that are really cool and put them into CS Proj. And so you'll see post our RTM, these things start coming back one by one as we move forward. I would not even be surprised if we even bring back maybe we do keep a Project JSON and it only works in limited scenarios. If that's what people want, we'll entertain that idea. But the point here is we want to standardize all the tooling across Xamarin, across Visual Studio, across VS Code, on all the platforms, on one tool set to build your applications, and that's going to be MS Build. And that's what we're talking about here. Next, as you look at these app models, I call these things app models. These are all the things that you build on top of .NET. And you can see here we've got your WPF, your WinForms, your ASP.NET, UWP, ASP.NET Core. These things, I want to get to a point where I don't have to rev the frameworks around these things as fast as I do today. Because you're going to get all this value from the build systems and from the .NET Standard. These things hopefully can rev a little bit slower on top of those. So let's talk about that. So the .NET Framework, we announced at the Build Conference a couple of things. One is we announced some cool WPF improvements around the ability to actually drag apps across monitors, and the font stayed the same. We updated a bunch of the crypto work all throughout the .NET Framework to stay up with the latest crypto standards. This includes click once support across all those new standards as well. We built some awesome new tooling for XAML. If you're building a WPF app, you now get web style designing, meaning that you can actually run the application, and as the application is running, you can go edit the XAML tree in Visual Studio without recompiling and rebuilding your application, very similar to how you would build a web application today. Another cool thing that I'm really happy to talk about is as we move into the next version of Windows, we're looking at ways to take people that have been building applications on WinForms and WPF and let you bridge yourself into the store model in the new versions of Windows 10. And so I hope what will come out of that is the ability to take a WinForm app, a WPF app, and actually package that up as a store app. And why that might be interesting to you, imagine this. One of the biggest challenges when you build a WinForm app or a WPF app today is how do you distribute it among all the desktops in your organization. You either use the click once technology that we talked about here and on the slide, or you've got some part of your team that uses whatever process they can to go blast this application onto a bunch of desktops. As we look at finding ways to get WinForms and WPF running as store applications in Windows 10, you'll be able to package these things as store apps and then use the store to push that across all the desktops in your organization, because you can have what's called an enterprise store, which is a store just for your organization. So that's a great example of how we're going to try to make it easier to put our existing assets into the store model. .NET Core. Love .NET Core. It's one of my favorite parts of the technology right now. And this is our open source platform for running across Windows, Mac, and Linux. The reason this is important to us, the cross-platformism is important to us, is we've seen a trend where customers are moving to Docker containers. And we want to make sure that .NET is one of the best platforms for building Dockerized applications. And right now, most Docker containers are Linux-based, and so that preempted us to actually have to move and make .NET Core run on that platform. It also is super important for us to have a super high, lightweight performance stack. And so as I talked earlier in the slide about the .NET Standard, about bringing more APIs back, I want to be very clear. Our goal with bringing APIs back is not to make .NET Core bigger or fatter. We'll use whatever technologies we have to make sure that you can still have an awesome, optimized size application. I hope to have the ability to have a really tiny Dockerized application running at like 50 or 60 megs with the OS and the actual applications themselves. All the .NET Core stuff, as I mentioned earlier, is all CLI based. You can do it all from command line. That enables the cross-platformisms, but it has awesome Visual Studio support as well. One of the first workloads we built on .NET Core was ASP.NET Core, and it is amazing. It's amazing from the standpoint that there's a benchmark out there called the Tech Empower benchmark, and we managed to lift ourselves up in the top 5 or 6 on that benchmark with .NET Core. That means that we're running way faster than Node.js, PHP, Python, Go. We want to make ASP.NET be one of these technologies. If you're building back-end applications that are doing APIs or doing HTML, ASP.NET Core should be one of the best ones for doing that. So that is that framework. Xamarin. The super exciting thing to me is the Xamarin stuff. And the Xamarin stuff is super important from the cross-platform device kind of model here. And so as the acquisition of Xamarin happened, we did a lot more things as well. We took all of their SDKs and made them open source, which I think is really cool. We also have some really cool tech where if you're building a Xamarin app on a Windows machine, we have a cool iOS emulator that you can actually run the iOS emulator on your Windows PC. It does that via remoting into a Mac and sharing the Mac to the Windows PC, but it's cool tech and really enables you to build awesome apps. So the next thing that I want to talk about is I want to actually talk about today we're going to announce the release date for .NET Core RTM. It's going to be made available sometime in the morning on June 27th. We're going to be at a Red Hat conference when we actually announce this thing, and I'm super happy about that. So on June 27th, you're going to have access to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework Core, and a tooling preview too for the current version of Visual Studio. So what does this mean to you? This means that starting on June 27th, you can build full production applications on ASP.NET Core, EF Core, and .NET Core. Notice that it says at the bottom here that our tooling will still be what we call preview. And the reason the tooling is still going to be preview is because we still see some changes happening. As we talked in the earlier slides, we're going to move away from Project JSON to a CS-Proj model. That will happen post the RTM. I want to be very clear, though, that as we make that transition from Project JSON to CS-Proj, it doesn't mean you're going to have to port your 1.0 application. Any application you build starting on June 27th with the 1.0 versions of these bits, you'll be able to easily take that application, just open it up in Visual Studio, and we'll convert it to the new CS-Proj system when that's available. And so I don't want people to be afraid of, I can't use the 1.0 because I think there's a big change coming beyond the 1.0 that's going to make me have to do something. As I mentioned earlier as well, with the 1.0, it's going to have a kind of small version of .NET Standard that's basically the same .NET Standard that we've been shipping in .NET Core for the last couple of months. But beyond that 1.0, as I said, these APIs are going to start pouring back into the product. And I also want to be very clear about that as well, is when those APIs start coming back, That not going to affect your 1.0 application at all. Your 1.0 application will still continue to compile and run just like it does today. So there's no port going on here. You'll just be able to add more capabilities, and it'll make it easier potentially to port your application from the .NET Framework, if you want, to .NET Core. Other things that are going to come in this wave as well, the post 1.0 wave. A lot of customers have asked me, hey, what's up with SignalR? There's no SignalR in ASP.NET Core, or there's no web pages in ASP.NET Core. When is that stuff going to come back? Well, the good news is, as soon as we ship this thing on June 27th, the web team's going to get back to adding new capabilities to the web stuff. So I think SignalR will probably be the first thing that will come back. And then, as I mentioned, I think some form of web pages will come back. And what web pages was something that let you actually build an ASP.NET app using the Razor syntax, but not having to have MVC controllers. And so I like to think of it as potentially having views without controllers coming back post that RTM. So let me jump over to a slide here and talk about the rest of the conference. So we have a great couple days worth of content for you guys. Today is kind of the web and language day, and so you're going to see that after myself, we've got Glenn Condron's going to come on and talk about building applications on ASP.NET Core. We've got Syed, and he is part of our team that builds the publishing pipeline and the final new experiences in Visual Studio for the web platform, and he's going to come and talk about how do you publish an ASP.NET Core application. Dan, he came from the WCF team, and he's working on Web API in our product for the last couple of years and MVC, and he's going to come and talk about how to build APIs with .NET Core and probably cover topics like, hey, I've got apps that are built on Web API. I don't see a Web API in .NET Core. How do I move those assets over? And he'll talk about that stuff. One of my favorite topics, we have Glenn Condron and Steve Lasker. They're going to come up and talk about building Dockerized container applications. And I mentioned before, that's something that we want to make .NET awesome for building. And one of the cool things here is, and they'll show this today, is you can actually sit on a Windows machine, build your application, and test it and run it on a Linux container on your same machine. So you can actually, on the same machine, build and test and run in basically the same production environment you're going to actually publish the app to when you're done. And then they'll show how you can take that application and publish it directly to something like Azure, which has Azure Container Services, a great way to host and run Dockerized applications. Then we have Philip Carter from the team. He's going to come and talk about F# and what's up with F#. And then finally, we've got Nikhil and Casey, and they're going to come and talk about awesome debugging tips for building .NET applications. Then tomorrow, we're going to move to a new day, have Miguel come out and talk about Xamarin and .NET. And then there's a bunch of content on building applications for platforms on this day. So there'll be something about building iOS and Android apps using Xamarin. We've got Daniel coming out, and he'll talk about building universal Windows applications on .NET. And then we have some folks coming in from Windows, and they're going to talk about how you build Centennial applications. How do you build an application that you can package up in a store and that kind of stuff. And then you're going to hear from Adrian. He's going to come and talk about mobile in the cloud. If you're going to build yourself a mobile application on .NET, how can you take advantage of some of the mobile capabilities that we have in Azure to do that? I love this. Nina, she's going to come and talk about Windows Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms is a cool model where you can actually build a form and share that same form across all the devices on the Xamarin stack. And then you're going to see some folks come out and talk about Hockey App, and this is a great way to actually measure the usage and the stuff going on inside of your application. And then finally, we have the NuGet team coming up, and they're going to talk about NuGet and what's going to happen in NuGet moving forward. And then finally, on the last day, we've got Scott Hanselman who's going to come up and have a community day. And so he'll kick off and kind of talk about the state of .NET. And then you'll see we'll have a whole bunch of community content here going on this day. And that's kind of the schedule for the next 3 days. It's going to be awesome. And I hope we do another one of these sometime in the fall as well, after we've shipped all the product and we can start telling you guys about the next version of Visual Studio and the next version of .NET Core, the next version of .NET Framework, and so on. So I hope you guys enjoy watching the conference today. We're looking for some great feedback on the product. You can always find me on Twitter at @CoolCSH. So thank you guys, and have a great day.